you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. We had a little issue with Teams there just a moment ago. I'd like to welcome you to today's partner web conference, Dynamics 365 for Field Service, Connected Field Service Enhancements, presented by David Clark, Program Manager 2, Chaitanya Yanapudi, Software Engineer 2, and Pokita Due, Software Engineer. My name is Peggy and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today indicates your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Access to the web conference recording will be delivered by email within 48 hours post-conference. If you have any questions for presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Please note our presenters may not answer your question until the end of today's presentation. Now on to the presentation. David, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Peggy. So, hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Dave Clark, and I lead product readiness for field service, universal resource scheduling, and connected field service. And I'm here with some of my engineer counterparts, Pokita and Chaitanya. And today we're going to talk about what's new for connected field service as part of the spring 2019 wave. And what we're going to do is we're going to explain the new features, and then we're actually going to have Chaitanya and Pokita walk through some of them. And please feel free to post your questions. We may answer them as they come in, and if we do not, don't worry, we have the last 15 minutes to go over the questions. So some of the things you'll see today actually have not been released yet. So please keep that in mind. They could be subject to change. Please don't necessarily rush out and speak with customers after this webinar. So before we dive into the new features, I want to take a step back and talk about the product trends that we're seeing with connected field service over the course of the past year, 2 years, 3 years. So the first thing I see is that the connected field service solution is becoming much more simple, and there's a real focus on simplicity. And what I mean by this is just the simple fact of setting up connected field service, setting up Azure, setting up Dynamics, and then connecting the two with connected field service is becoming a much easier process. And then after setting it up, the process by which you connect a IoT device, have that telemetry filtered into Azure, and then the way that you create work orders from that telemetry is actually becoming a much easier process as well. And then adding to that, we recently came out with IoT Central, which is perhaps the easiest way to set up connected field service. And then they're also constantly building new flow templates, which allow you to more easily connect Azure and Dynamics as well. So next thing that is a product trend is seamless integration. And again, connected field service is built on Azure IoT and in Dynamics, and we want to make sure that moving back and forth between those two solutions is very easy. Another thing that you'll see is a seamless integration is you could register an IoT device in IoT Central and it'll pop up in Dynamics. Or now you could even register it in Dynamics and it'll show in IoT, in Azure IoT. So it really goes back and forth quite easily. Now, another big investment area is visualizations. You can imagine with IoT data, it could be somewhat difficult to consume. So imagine if you have hundreds and thousands of devices and every 6 seconds they're sending a reading. It could be very tough to make sense of that. So we're investing a lot in visualizations, which will help, graph out the different sensor readings. And then what we're doing with something that Chaitanya will show later is we're actually overlaying work order and field service information on top of those sensors. And lastly, a big investment for us is IoT for field technicians. Now, traditionally, the IoT solutions are going to be consumed by IT and folks who are in the back office, but we're making a lot of investments to surface that information to the field technician while they're on site at the customer's location, perhaps fixing a piece of equipment. And we're trying to understand how they could use that information to make their job easier and perhaps improve their first-time fix rate. So for today, we're going to, first I want to talk about a few of the fundamentals of connected field service so that we all know what we're talking about. I want to go over 3 important new features: embedded IoT visualizations, device commands, and IoT for field technicians. Then move on to a few announcements and talk about our release notes. And then lastly, we'll finish with Q&A. So you're going to hear me, Chaitanya, and Pulkita talk a lot about, you're going to hear us speak a lot about a lot of the concepts in connected field service. So one thing we're going to talk about a lot is IoT alerts. And when we talk about IoT alerts, what we're talking about is alerts that are in Dynamics. And those alerts have usually passed through some sort of filter. So you have these devices sending all their telemetry to Azure. And then what we're doing is we're taking a subset of those we're taking a subset of that Azure telemetry, and we're having ones that may need attention. We're having those filtered into Dynamics. And that's a new entity called IoT alerts. Next, you'll hear us talk about devices. Sometimes we call them sensors. And devices are an internet connected sensor that collects some sort of measurement. So imagine an internet connected thermometer. In this case, the thermometer is a device. Now that device, that thermometer, can sit on a larger asset. So imagine an HVAC unit. That's an asset. That's a customer asset. And one asset can actually have many devices on it. So you could have one HVAC unit, and on that you might have one thermometer reader, you might have another gyroscope reader, and that's usually what work orders are performed on, that asset record. And then lastly, you'll hear us talk about commands. Commands are a way of performing actions remotely on a device. So an example would be you could remotely reboot something or restart it or even turn it off. Now, when you log into field service, if you're on the latest version, you'll actually see that the connected field service solution and all these entities that I'm talking about are displayed in the field service solution. And as of recently, this is going to be true for folks that are using field service, the 7 version. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is there are 2 ways to deploy connected field service. One is connected field service with IoT Central, and the other one is connected field service with IoT Hub. So when you think of connected field service with IoT Central, we like to call this IoT or CFS for mere mortals. And by that I mean you don't need to be a developer, you don't need to know how to code. It is a more simple way of setting up an IoT solution. It's a SaaS offering, and I would say that it's best for getting started and for performing proof of concepts. One architect that I work with, he refers to it as, imagine setting up plumbing and running water through the plumbing without any of the risk of a flood. So I see that as a way of setting up an IoT solution, understanding the goals, having data pass through, defining the processes, but it's much easier and it's much less of investment, so it's much less risk. And then the second way of doing it is CFS with IoT Hub, which is probably more of a developer experience. It's a platform as a service. And this is for folks who really need to do a more complex and a more customizable implementation. Now, when it comes to getting started, if you're new to Connected Field Service, we recommend starting with Connected Field Service with Azure IoT Central. And we actually have a video here that will take you through step by step how to set up an Azure trial, set up an Azure IoT trial, then set up a Dynamics 365 for field service trial, connect those two, start simulating device telemetry, and then having that telemetry create work orders. So it's a really great video. It's only 15 minutes and you can get up and running with Connected Field Service. And there's a link here at the bottom for those. And of course, we'll send out this deck after. So let's quickly jump into the spring 2019 features. So first one that Chaitanya is going to be speaking about a little bit later is embedded IoT visualizations. This is really exciting. Folks who have been working with Azure IoT, they're used to seeing this telemetry graphed out for them. But what we're doing is we're taking the graph of all this with all the device sensor or the device telemetry rather. We're actually taking that graph and we're exposing it in Dynamics on the IoT alert, on the work order, on the case, and even on the asset. And one thing you'll see that we're doing here is we're actually overlaying work order information on top of these readings. So as an example, let's say, one of these is indicating the vibration of the device. And we might be able to correlate, all right, because of the vibration, it was concerning for us. We then scheduled a work order, and you can even see if a work order was completed, and you can see if that IoT metric was remedied. So what's important about this is it helps organizations understand work orders in the context of device telemetry. And this feature, we're typically expecting it to be used by customer service reps, dispatchers, and service managers. And one important note about this is it is only available currently with Connected Field Service with IoT Hub. So moving along, you're going to see updates to device commands. And like I said earlier, commands allow you to perform actions on devices remotely. So you could reboot it, you could restart it, you could shut it down, or you can create custom commands. And what's important about this is it improves a customer service rep's ability to diagnose and resolve issues remotely, which could help you avoid sending a technician on site. So, a lot of us are used to calling up support, and one of the first things they'll say is, have you tried to restart your device? Well, what this is saying is we could have a customer service rep restart the device, and if perhaps that could fix the issue, then you could avoid sending a technician on site to have to do a repair. What we're seeing in the industry is just sending a field technician on site costs usually on average about a minimum of $1,000 between the equipment, the resource time, the equipment, and the vehicle. And this is also something that is probably going to be used by customer service reps. So you can create and execute commands in Azure IoT or in Connected Field Service. And the gateway between them is actually Microsoft Flow, which will help communicate between the two platforms. Now, though we expect this to be used by customer service reps in the back office, we're also exploring how best to allow field technicians to use commands as well, keeping in mind that would require internet connection. Now, another thing that I'm really excited about is IoT for field technicians. So like we said earlier, we want to allow field technicians to view and interact with connected field service data and actions on the field service mobile on their phone or tablet. So while you're on a device, for example, if I was servicing a customer service asset, from that asset, I could look at related devices and see all the IoT data that is streaming in. And we think that this will empower field technicians with data and increase the likelihood of them fixing a problem the first time. You'll see IoT being lit up with Field Service Mobile 11.3, which is currently in private preview in a beta version, and we're hoping to have it released before the fall. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chaitanya, who's actually going to demo the IoT visualization part of this.
Hi all, I'm Chaitanya, a software developer on Connected Field Service. Just give me a second, I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, I'm Chaitanya, a software developer on Connected Field Services team. Let us look into embedded IoT visualization feature. I'll take a scenario to explain on how this feature will benefit customer service representatives, dispatchers, service managers, or field technicians. In this example, when a device's temperature exceeded the threshold of 33 degrees, an alert is created. You can see that this alert has a temperature of 33.3 degrees centigrade, and that is the reason it has been created. Before having this feature, users did not have an easy way to get information on history of device readings. But now it makes it easier to check the current and past readings of a device from a single tab. This visualization is part of New Device Readings tab. As you can see here, we have device readings for the last 30 days. On the left, we see device measurements. We have an option to see or hide the device readings. We also have an option to choose average, min, max, sum, and count for these measurements. Let us take an example. Now I want to see the maximum of humidity in this last 30-day range period. And I choose maximum, and you can see that the values for humidity have changed. We can also see events, that is work orders for this device. This visualization helps us to correlate work orders created to device measurements. As you can see here, this work order corresponds to temperature increase for this device. A technician is sent to fix this device. Once the issue is fixed, the work order has been closed. And we can see that the temperature comes below the threshold. But the technician has not fixed the device tightly enough, and so we see that the vibration measurements have gone up after closing this work order. But another work order has not been created in this period because the vibrations have stayed under the threshold limits. Recently, there was another increase in the temperature and a work order has been created. Now, when the technician goes on site to fix the temperature issue, he can also check the readings of this device and he or she can see that the vibrations have gone up and he can ensure to tightly fix the device. This device readings visualization tab is available on IoT Alert, Case, Work Order, Asset, and Device Forms. We are using Azure Time Series Insights for this. You can deploy Azure Time Series Insights through our Connected Field Services deployment app. In the Configure Azure Resources section, we have added a new section which says Deploy Time Series Insights Preview. And once you select this, you have an option to enter client ID, client secret, and or if you have an existing time series insights, you can even go ahead and choose that. Now I would like to pass on to Pulkita to give more insights into other ways to resolve an issue.
Thanks, Chaitanya. Pulkita speaking here. I'm another software engineer on the team. So, okay, there we go. So let's actually take a step back and look at what is it that we can do before we create a work order to try and resolve the problem remotely. So in this case, let's take a closer look at what the process for an end-to-end process for sending a command to a device looks like. So let's say you're a heating company and you have thousands of devices. You manage all of your devices from IoT Central. And here you can see all the different devices, device sets, you have your device templates, and let's take this HVAC terminal unit, for example. So you're able to see all your device readings in real time. Instead of having to go through each and every device and making sure all of the properties are being reported within range, you can configure different rules so that when, for in this example, when the temperature is greater than 28 degrees, an alert is triggered. As David mentioned, you can have a Microsoft flow that will actually go through this process. So once you have an alert that comes through, you can manage all of your alerts from the Connected Field Service portal. So here you can see all the different alerts that come in. You can see what time, the status. So let's go ahead and click on one of the alerts that came in. We see here that the alert time is yesterday, and we'll see all the alert data that came in as well. We'll see what device that it belonged to, and as Chaitanya was mentioning, you can actually go ahead and look at the device readings. So in the past 7 days, you can see that there's a rather high spike in the temperature. Now, before creating that work order that Chaitanya was mentioning, let's try to do our due diligence in seeing if there's anything that we can do to self-heal and resolve the problem by sending a command. We'll go ahead and click the send command button. So one thing to note here is that we have changed and simplified the experience of sending a command. So within 2 buttons, 2 clicks, you're able to actually go ahead and send a command. So since the temperature was a lot higher than we would have liked it to be, let's hope that resetting the damper will resolve the issue. So we'll go ahead and click this reset damper. We'll see here that one of the default parameters for exhaust start time is 30 seconds. So we'll go ahead and leave it as is and send. So once a command is sent, you can view the command status. So we'll go ahead in the commands tab and look at, we're able to visually see what other commands have been sent in the past. So we can see here we've sent, a couple of times. This time there was an error, but you're able to see if in the past other people have tried to resolve the problem remotely as well. So what ends up happening is that you went from having to wait for a device to break and then diagnosing the problem to being able to instantly see which device isn't behaving properly. And beyond that, you're able to see what exactly went wrong. And from that, send a command to the device. So let's take a closer look at one of the flows that are working in the background. So we have, when you send the command, you're able to actually see, okay, when a command is sent, you get the associated command definition name, so what kind of command it is. You can case on here depending on what types of commands that you have, and correspondingly run that command on that device. And then you'll be able to actually see if it was sent or if there was an error, and then go further looking at what went wrong. So to recap, if you're sending, before you send out a technician and spend a lot of money in doing that, as David was mentioning, we can try our self-healing steps and see, okay, if we do send a command to reset the damper, we'll look back at the device readings and see, are the properties stabilized? And if so, great, we're able to solve the problem without having to do anything intensive. And if not, okay, we can go ahead and schedule that work order, sending a technician with all the right properties and tools to have a first-time fix. So that is the end of the demo for showing sending a command to a device. But let's keep this scenario in mind as we talk about what it looks like for a IoT on mobile scenario. So for this, let's change personas. Instead of being the heating company management, you're now a field technician. So as a field technician, you're on the site of the device and you just got a work order come in. So you're going to open up your field service mobile. We'll navigate here to our work order, and we'll see here, this is the latest work order that came in. From here, we can look at all the properties of this work order. And one of the things to notice here, we'll see here that unit is overheating, and we have an IoT alert associated to it, meaning that this problem has an IoT device connected. So let's look at what are the readings of this IoT device, what went wrong. Once you do that, you can see all the descriptions. Again, you're able to see all of the alert data. We can go ahead and scroll down and see, okay, which device is actually the problem. So let's go ahead and navigate to this device. Here we can view the device twin properties and see what are the measurements being sent in. We can scroll down and see what are the current device readings. On top of that, we can also see actually the previous command sent. So we see here that we tried to reset the damper in the past, and that probably helped stabilize the temperature. But unfortunately, the humidity is oscillating way more than we would like it to. So as you can see, as a technician, we can go ahead and try to send a command to this device. And we'll see here that instead of sending a damper reset, we'll try again to have the humidity sensor recalibrate. So again, this is an effort to do our due diligence that before we start investing all of the time and energy into breaking apart this HVAC device and disassembling it and seeing what went wrong, by just trying this simple command to see if this resolves the issue. And if so, what we can actually do, so right now let's just discard, we'll go back, and once we send the command, we can wait to see the device readings and see if that solved it. And if it did, well, great. I don't have to invest all of my time into disassembling the device. But if it doesn't go right, now I can know what one of the issues it isn't likely to have been causing. So resetting the humidity sensor recalibration may not be something that would solve it. So when I do disassemble the HVAC device, I'd be looking for something else. So this is one of the ways how IoT on mobile can empower field technicians to be much more efficient and help them save a whole lot of time and money. Okay, David, handing it back to you to continue.
Thanks, Polkita. So just a few more announcements before we wrap it up. The first one is we are continually adding new flow templates. So I encourage you to go to flow.microsoft.com and simply search for CFS. And you'll find new templates. As an example, in the past, there was a connector to Dynamics, but what they're actually do is they're moving towards a connector to the common data model, which you'll see here as a different icon. And actually, in fact, some geographies will only see the connector to common data service or common data model. And then another important update is that we're extending our device twin capabilities in connected field service. So device twin capability device twinning is the ability to add extra details about an IoT device. And what we're saying here is that you can actually enter in that information in connected field service, and that'll actually be sent back to Azure IoT. So I want to thank everyone for joining. And I want to remind everyone that there's really 3 great places to get the latest field service information, whether it's field service, universal resource scheduling, or connected field service. The first one is our doc site, and we'll have step-by-step documentation there. Video tutorials along with this webinar will be posted on our YouTube playlist, and you'll see the link there. And then for our Microsoft folks, we have feature walkthroughs that we conduct with folks like Polkita and the other program managers and engineers. So again, this recording will be posted, and we'll actually be sending out the PowerPoint to everyone as well. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, guys.
Thank you to everybody who joined. I apologize for the fact that Teams is not functioning today. Again, we will post a link to the recording, and everyone will receive an email. And I did post a link to a survey here. Please let us know your feedback. We understand that Teams did not work, so we appreciate your feedback on that. And I would like to thank everybody for joining, and have a great day or evening wherever you are.
Thanks, Peggy.